You are listening to FirstGen Healing, a podcast on Latinx healing and awakening journeys. My name is Priscila Luna. I am your host, and today we are gathered here for a part two with a guest that I had on, I think it was almost a year ago.
Yeah.
So, Michael, hello. Welcome back to FirstGen Healing.
Hello. I'm so excited to be back. And I was trying to think back, when was the last time that we actually recorded? We did the Valentine's Day
Oh,
self-love
yes.
episode. So that was
Yeah,
a little over a year ago, but I think the first time me and you recorded was even longer. I think
that's
maybe,
true.
yeah, like a year and a
Yeah,
half, maybe 2 years. So I
yeah.
am very excited to be here. Thank you for having me again. I'll reintroduce myself for any new folks, but my name is Michael Lemus, and I'm the founder and CEO of Reclaiming Your Happiness with Lemus LLC, where I serve primarily these days actually as a content creator, a life and business coach, and a brand consultant. Throwing a little bit of speaking
Wow.
engagements here and there, but yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Yeah. Yay! Yes, I love what you do through your company and the content that you put out. And I know that both of us share kind of talking a little bit about awakening,
Hmm.
healing, being a first gen. And one thing that I noticed that we share through part one, which I'll link in the description as well, is that both of us were or are achievement oriented, right? So we kind of
Yes.
we're the ones that wanted to make our parents proud. We're following that American dream and we're doing it quickly, right? It was kind of like, okay, what's
Yes.
next? What's next? What's next? And so as we've been on this journey, I've noticed that kind of like me, you're also going through some deaths and rebirths and like letting go of certain things. And that can be hard when you're someone who is used to knowing what you want, used to knowing who you are, right? Like you kind of have to stand in that confidence to keep
Mhm.
going as a first gen. And I think it served us, right? It served us for a lot
Yeah.
of things. But there comes a time in the journey where maybe we're being asked to act and look at things a little bit different. So does that resonate? Did I like capture that
Yes.
correctly?
It absolutely resonates. And I think what you just mentioned around it serving us,
Mm,
it's so interesting because I've been thinking about that for a while. I would say definitely this past year about what that like fast paced, quote unquote, success by at least a westernized society standards
yeah.
served. And I think a lot of it served multiple purposes, but I would say that a lot of it was also ego based and ego driven. And
Mm,
is not giving what it was supposed to have gave for me anymore. And that's been a big realization for me over the past year where I'm like, oh my gosh, like a lot of the things that I
mm,
thought that I was going to do long term, like are not applicable anymore, but also just the emotional feeling. I do think to your point around an awakening and that spiritual perspective,
yeah.
like deep down, your body, your intuition will tell you when something's just not it anymore. But it's hard, right? It's hard to come out of that sometimes, but I very much resonate with what you just said.
Yeah. Ah! Okay. So, and maybe like because we were running this program, like, let me not get to awakening topic, but like more so because, we get laser focused, let's say, we're
Yeah.
growing up, we're like, wow, we're seeing how much our parents are struggling. We're seeing that they
Hmm.
are making these sacrifices. And so we start to carry this fuel within us that's like, we're going to be successful no matter what, right? Like this is going to happen no matter what. And so I think there's some sort of masking that happens without even us realizing, where it's like we figure things out as we go. There is no room for I couldn't figure it out. I didn't know
Yep.
how. That can again like it serves us, it gets us through the steps, but then there comes a point where that same thing burns you out, right? Because it's
Yes.
hard to go around
Yes.
life thinking that you have to get it all right and that you always have to figure it out.
Yes, all that. The times 100. And when my awakening started a few years back, or actually now I guess it's been a while, 2017, 2018. That was part of my awakening. It was understanding that I was
Mm,
actually burning myself out um significantly, like mental health struggle challenges at the time were like at the highest that they've ever been.
yeah.
But on the surface, and I know we've talked about this before, right? Like on the surface, it was also such a quote unquote successful time for me in terms of where I
Mm,
was in my career and stuff that I was doing, like chairing conference committees and winning awards. But um, it's also very cyclical for me because for
Mm.
for my woo woo fans out there, that you go through your Saturn's return from, I think it's
Oof.
27 or 28 to about 31, 32. I just
Mm-hmm.
turned 32 this past
Okay.
November, and I very much feel like there's a lot of cycles that are closing out. And you
Yeah.
mentioned rebirth. I have very much been feeling that, especially since my birthday this past November, around just what it actually means to be me. And that pressure
Mm.
that you mentioned has been such a significant portion of my life. And so I've been unlearning a big part of that identity, which was very much rooted in people pleasing,
Mm.
and very much rooted in people pleasing with family in particular. And so that's something I'm like, oh, when you start to unravel that, I've been describing it to my therapist as like the veil gets lifted. And when you can
Mm-hmm.
see that deep of a foundational like revelation, whatever you want to call it, everything else in your life, at least for me, is now assessed through a different lens. And that's been so
Mm.
much of this past year. And it's exhausting, y'all. But at the same time, I'm like, oh, this is what life can look like if I actually choose to live life for myself. Still being a caring
Mm-hmm.
individual, but actually choose to live life for myself. And it's hard, but it does feel like less pressure. I will say that.
Yeah. Ooh, okay. So you mentioned the veil, right?
A
So I think
veil.
that in the awakening world, people use that word a lot, right? So, like the veil
Mhm.
of conditioning of society. And the thing
Yes.
is, like, I think we talk about like escaping the matrix, but we don't realize that our own families can be matrices of their own. Wouldn't you
Yes.
say? So like it's like a mini society upholding this veil, right? And so let's talk about maybe what are some things that make that veil heavy. So like is it, let's say, like parental expectations, their vision of your future,
Yes.
maybe your vision of your future that you've been carrying along. So maybe when you were 15 you decided, okay, I'm going to be the first in the family to get a degree, a
Mhm.
master's, I'm going to buy a house, I'm going to do blah 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 blah, and then you carry that and it becomes really heavy. What else would you say is like part of the
Oh
things we
my
carry
gosh.
through?
For first gen, especially for children of immigrants, right? Like there's so many layers. One of them being like, you might be the translator in your family. You might be the one to like help interpret like legal jargon, or if your
Yeah.
parents are like looking through benefits for the first time, or like that type of stuff. Like you take on, at least for a lot of us, right? Like we take on a role very early on in our youth to like take on those responsibilities. And
Yeah.
it's out of the goodness of our own heart. But I think, and I don't know if you resonate with this, but part of what has been a little difficult for me in also identifying as first gen is that the cultural component, and my therapist actually said it in a really great way. She's like, you grew up in a collective family, collective culture. She's Latina as
Mm-hmm.
well. And she's like, but it also sounds like there's maybe some potential conflict in navigating like what like the United States is, right? Like it's a westernized, individualized
Mm,
culture, capitalistic as well. And so when those two interface, like it could be difficult. And so for me, it's been kind of unraveling the stuff where it's like, okay, I took on that pressure, that weight of all those responsibilities. And, you know, growing up, I feel like at a very early age when it came to the level of responsibilities that I had,
yeah.
while at the same time now, like decades later, realizing like, oh, but what does it mean to actually truly live life for myself when I'm not thinking about everyone else in the picture?
Right.
And that's
Yeah.
that guilt sometimes that I also feel around like, oh, well, I still feel like there's this culture, right, that I'm very much a part of, while also like this westernized, individualized, like I'm going to choose life like for myself is not very engraved in our culture. Typically, it's very much like you're thinking about everyone else, including your family, especially your family. And it's been a harder part of my journey, and the
Mm-hmm.
pressure is intense. But I think recently I discovered how much the pressure was negatively impacting me and the weight
Mm-hmm.
that I had carried for the majority of my life. And so now I'm like, well, I mean, the guilt is something I'm going to have to work through, but that guilt is not worth me not prioritizing myself in this way. And so it's just
Yeah.
like a conflict, internal conflict that I experience sometimes.
Yeah. What's kind of hard is we're presented with the fact that everything you do is for the family, right? Like you're doing
Yes.
this for the
Yes.
family, and I did this for you. And so now you get to do this
Yes.
for me. So there's like
Yes.
this, you owe me, I owe you. However, what I started to realize too, as part of this super layered experience, is that um, similarly to what maybe we're starting to gauge, is that our parents maybe did things for their family, but their family doesn't take them into consideration as much as they do. And although like that is exists and is also a truth, they don't name that because there is shame and guilt behind that. And so instead they like further perpetuate it down the line to us. And then you kind of hear stories though, and they're like, but your mom never said she loved you and she preferred your brothers. And, so
Mhm.
there's so much there and like so much pain that they don't name, that then like that's what I think we start to gauge, where it's like, wait,
Oh
hold
yeah.
on, like things are not adding up the way. It's not this perfect, beautiful family that supports each other and then like is there for each other. It's feeling a little bit not as equal, and that's where I
Yes.
think like we get to name it, but in doing that, we're kind of seen as selfish, or that's where the guilt, the
Mhm.
shame, and all that comes in, right?
Yes, it's not giving what it was supposed to have gave. And so
Yeah.
that's the thing where I for me, it, I have felt like a black sheep of my family for a long time. And I'm
Mm.
going back to like 13, 14 when I started to like pick up on the cues, right? Where I'm like,
Oh, okay.
some of this stuff is unhealthy AF. Like this is not making sense. And why do people continue to hang out with each other when there's
Mm-hmm.
clearly a lot wrong. And I remember like early on as I got into high school, especially in college, like just not wanting to interact with a lot of my family. And so
Okay.
I wouldn't go to the family barbecues and the occasions. And, you know, I know that's hard for sometimes people to take in because when I have
Yeah.
mentioned that sometimes to other folks that identify as first gen, they're like, oh, I can never do that. Like that's my family. Like I have to always like
Mm.
we have our issues, but we're always together. And for me, I'm
Right.
like, I'd rather be like alone than feel like I have to, I don't know, like fake it in those
Mm-hmm.
experiences or just put up with something that I simply do not find to be appropriate or okay. I still love my family, but at the same time, like I have to gauge like what's healthy and unhealthy, at least for myself when it comes to my
Yeah.
own boundaries. So to your point, yeah, like it's perpetuated, and that's why I think that generational trauma like is an actual thing because it really does get passed on. And I do want to touch on one more thing that you mentioned because I've talked
Mm-hmm.
about this with my partner a lot. And it's this idea that you need to repay your family and repay your
Mm-hmm.
parents. And I know this may ruffle some feathers with some people that really feel that way. I used to be one of them. So
Yeah.
it's so hard because I also thought that. And so the reason why I would also not put myself at the forefront was, well, I have to constantly do all these things to make sure that they're okay. And it's like, wait,
Mm-hmm.
I can still support them in ways that are healthy for me. And I think what I see from a lot of folks, including myself in the past, is like we would not put ourselves as a priority and only support, or people please all the time. And then it comes at an expense. And I saw
Right.
this trend recently. I don't know if you saw it, but mostly women were doing it on TikTok, but it was like the strong, independent woman. And like so many, and I was like, yeah, it was like, gut wrenching and emotional because there are so many people that like their family have positioned them to be like, independent and like they can handle everything and they've been doing it since they were a kid. Like they're so independent, they're so strong. And then you have like these people making these videos of like breaking down in their cars because no one gets to see that. And I'm
Yeah.
just like, that's to me unhealthy. And
Yeah.
it's hard to also be met with people like ourselves sometimes where just like the culture part is something I think we need to unravel together because it's like we can still feel proud to be, Latino, for
Mm.
example, to be first gen, to be children of immigrants, to acknowledge everything that our parents and our family did for us, and then also acknowledge that, hey, individually, we got to take care of ourselves too. So it's a lot, so many
It's
layers.
so much. It's so much. Okay, there's two things. Let me try not
Yeah.
to forget. So the first thing is like I think that as we are coming into this knowing, like we start to realize that this idea of like unconditional love within the family is a little bit of a fantasy. And so
Mm-hmm.
when you start to step away, right, you start to like not go to the family gatherings and stuff. It's so interesting what happens because like it's a fantasy, but yet you feel lonely and you feel like, oh, I wish, and it's kind of like you still believe in the fantasy too a
Totally.
little bit,
Yeah.
and you miss it because it's like you're grieving that idea of like you thought that if you were this person that you've always been, that you were going to get back that, from your family. And when you start to realize that's actually not going to happen, it's like a grieving of the fantasy that everyone is upholding, right?
Yeah. I literally just put out a thread last night, not a tweet, a thread,
Okay.
about how you could be surrounded by people that support you and still feel really lonely. And that's something that,
Mm,
especially through the holidays and like going into this year, I have felt a number of times where it's like, oh, I have people that support me and I know would be there to support me if I reached out for help. But I still have these moments. And I think so much of it for me is rooted in family because I don't have the best communication with them right now. And so it's like when you lose such a big part of what has been your foundation for so long, it's like a rediscovery, at least for myself, while also acknowledging, like, oh, um, when you grow up fiercely independent and there's so much responsibility and weight on you, I literally this morning I was like, oh my gosh, like, did that stunt my relationships in some way? Because I also
mm,
grew up like I can take care of myself, I can do all these things, and I don't need to ask for much help. Um, and in fact, I used to have like shame and guilt when I had to like ask for help in the past,
yeah.
and I was like, I'm coming to understand and unravel all the pieces of like, oh, how I also present or have presented myself to people in the past, it may also be projecting like he doesn't need help or he is
Mm,
fine. And it's one of those things where I don't know if you've seen that post. It goes out every so often, but it's like check on your successful friends or check on your like strong friends. And whenever I see that, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I resonate so much with that because I think this image that I portray sometimes is like, oh, I had like all these things going on and like,
mm,
this exciting stuff. And it's like, oh, but I still have these moments of loneliness and like sadness. And
yeah.
I don't talk about that as often. So it's like, I want to, I think I'm doing a disservice to myself if I don't, because I this morning I was like, oh, maybe that stunted some of my relationships and like how close I've been able to get to certain people, or on the other flip side, how close people have been able to get to me. I'm like, oh,
Hmm.
so
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Okay. So one, I wanted to say just like the being surrounded. I made a poem like literally about that where yeah, but I haven't shared it. Where it's
ooh,
like surrounded by people like it's crazy how you can be surrounded by people but not be seen. Like still like you're
yeah,
surrounded but not supported or surrounded but not
yes,
fully seen. But kind of circling back to that trend or
mhm,
that viral trend of independence, absolutely. Like that's something that I always talk to the people that I work with about is that there's two versions of us that exist in the world. Being those independent, achievement, like responsible children, okay? There's the one that we present to others, which is like this shiny, happy, I got this
yep,
version of us. I'm here to help you. How are you? Good, but how are you? I want to be here for you. I want to hear you out. Like I want to support you. And then there's this other part of us that kind of hides in the dark, that we don't really
mhm,
show, that maybe
mhm,
is always doubting, questioning, analyzing, that feels lonely, that doesn't feel fully supported. And exactly, I think the bridge is like understanding that you get to be your whole self in
yeah,
front of everyone. But that's really hard to make that transition because I think that also how I explain it is kind of like okay, this is funny, but like we're like a little octopus, okay?
yes,
I call
yes,
it the individuation octopus. Okay, so this
yes,
is you, and these are your tentacles, and you like tie your worth to your how your family thinks of you. Like, oh, es una buena
mhm,
hija, buen hijo, right? Okay,
mhm,
your friends, oh, they're a good friend. Your work, oh, they're a good worker, and so all of your self worth is tied to other things, right?
yes,
And so when you
yes,
think of showing up fully, which is like not the shiny part, it's the part of you that needs help or that's questioning things, it it like jeopardizes in your mind, like you think, oh, it means that one of these things is going to fall through and I'm not going to be
yeah,
okay. And
yes,
so when that like that's why the transition is so hard, because you actually don't stand on any leg that's your own. Like you don't have your own
Right.
sense of like worth and like, trust and love and all of that.
That's so powerful because, if you look at each of the tentacles, it's based off of what other people interpret you to be.
Yeah.
And again, for me, like this, like letting go of this people pleasing identity has been so heavy because I didn't recognize, literally, I think it was like a few months before my birthday, I was in a therapy session. I was like, oh my gosh, like that has been my identity. Like even
Mm.
through the healing that I've done these past like 5, 6, 7 years,
Yeah.
still so much of it was rooted in people pleasing and the interpretation that other people had of me, and less
Mm-hmm.
about me being like, no, this is all of me. And I appreciate what you mentioned around the whole self, because going back to what I mentioned a little earlier around how I think sometimes people perceive me is
Yeah.
like they may not see the whole self. And I think part of it has been for me a protective measure where I haven't allowed people to see all of it.
Yeah.
And I've been working on that. And so I think that's a bigger goal of mine because I was like, well, I want at this stage in life reciprocity. And so when it comes to reciprocity, if I really want people to feel like they can get that close to me and support me in the way that I really feel like I need to be supported, they need to also see that. And so that's been a big piece that I've been working through as well. Cause I'm like, I don't think many people have seen the whole version of me. And to be fair, I haven't seen the whole version of myself until recently.
Yeah.
And it's a little messy sometimes. So it's like, wait, okay. So,
Yeah, we don't realize how hard we're masking, right? Like how much we're
yeah.
actually like putting up this mask. I'll share like because I do, I feel like I've been going through that journey, and these last 2 years I let corporate go, which meant
Yep.
financially, I haven't been as fluffy as good,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so my family has seen me go through this transition, and in that I've allowed myself to show like the weaker, let's say, right? Because maybe in my mind, that was the part that I saw. Like, I'm used to seeing others cry, I'm used to seeing others' problems. When I started going through my own really hard stuff, I realized that the adults around me, every time I picked up a phone, it was like, here are my issues, my stress, my problem. And because I
Mm-hmm.
was a good listener, I'd listen,
Mm-hmm.
but I'd always feel like, well, they have enough. I'm not going to throw my
Yeah.
like my costalito.
Yes.
And so then like, but it was I started to notice it in every conversation, right? Everyone came with their costalito and boom, they wouldn't even ask like, do you have
Yep.
space for this? Like, and because they were used to me being good. And so when I stopped being good and when I started showing that like, hey, I'm stressed too, it started to, like you said, like create more actually more authentic relationships, because then they had
Yeah.
to pull back a little bit and recognize that, oh, Priscilla needs space holding too, like it's not just like she's not just an ear. Like she
Yeah.
also has stuff to get out, and so it like it's changed the way people approach me, where it's kind of like they now make space in the conversation for me. But also
Yes.
anytime anyone would ask me like, oh, necesitas dinero, I'd always be like, no, gracias, no, 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 no. I'll
Mm-hmm.
get credit card debt before asking anyone for money, right? And now
Yes.
I started to be like, yeah, I do. Like, actually, I'm a little bit short on money, or like, oh, yo pago. No, 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 no. Now I've been like, oh, thank you so much. And
Yes.
I-
Yes.
I've recognized like, oh, I could have been doing this the whole time, but I've been the one that's like, no, 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 right? Blocking off receiving as
Yeah.
well.
Well, it's so deeply rooted. To your point, when I first started, like, and this literally has been in the last year, like letting people even know these things that I'm sharing with you now. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it was weird for me at first to accept people holding space for me,
Mm,
because I was so used to always being on the other end, like always hearing about the issues and other people sometimes just trauma dumping on me.
yeah.
And it is interesting to get even accustomed to receiving. I
Mm,
think that's a big part of it too. Um, and I think sometimes I'll interface with like, oh well, this is how this person, this friend views me, right? Or like this group of people views me this way. And that prevents me from showing up sometimes as just like a whole ass human being with like issues with, sadness and fear and all these things. And so I've been trying to let go, or at least not like from the get, like thinking about what they're thinking of me, and more of like, no, I get to show up
mm,
as just my whole self. And if they're a friend, right, or someone that really does want to support me, they're going to be there for all of it. And we can hold
Yeah.
each other accountable and we can support each other. And that's what I'm recognizing now. It's like, that's what I want. I don't want relationships that are tied to just one interpretation, right? Because we're human beings. We're supposed to change. We're supposed to evolve. And so that's something that I've been recognizing is like, I really, truly want reciprocity. And it wasn't until recently that I even allowed myself to actually want that. So now I'm
Mm,
like, nah, like that's what I want. And so I gotta
yeah.
proceed as such. But yeah, it's interesting. And I think so much of it for me, I'm recognizing it's family based. It's really so
Mm,
deeply rooted in family. Like that really impacted everything for me. And so as that has been, you know, working itself out in terms of boundaries that I've placed and distance that I've needed to take, um, so many other things are just opening up. And that's also been interesting, just spiritually speaking, because my therapist said that like there's this pruning type of experience as you're grieving and mourning, right? Like there's certain things that you get to keep
mm,
or you can keep if you want from certain relationships. And then there's certain things that you have to prune away. Like they just no longer
mm.
serve you. And that's been kind of where I've been at these past few months where it's like, okay, there's certain happy memories and there's certain things that I get to still go back to if I want, but there's also things that were never healthy or that should have never happened, and I get to prune that away now. But each little
Wow.
pruning is like its own experience. So it's like, oh, it's very, very exhausting.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, I think also that's why it's important to focus on your own journey, because
Yeah.
sometimes we can get stuck in the not wanting to prune, so trying to change the person so that
Yes.
you they can stay around, right? Because you're like, okay, I recognize this is toxic or this isn't not working out for me. And when you start to protect your peace, that's when you're able to recognize that, right? Because like when you don't care about your peace and you just care about the relationships you have, or like the interpretation that they have of you, that
Yes.
like is a different experience than protecting your peace and being like, I know who I am and how I feel, and I like now can moderate like my, I don't react to everything. And now I'm seeing that like there's a negative reaction to our interaction, so I need something to shift. And so I think that's where we can get stuck in like trying to set a boundary, it not being well received, okay, trying to approach it a different way. And so you're kind of like constantly trying to change the other person so that you don't have to leave, right? And that can be so hard, and you can get stuck in that. So it's so, I think it's so important, and maybe part of you being able to like pull away is your
Yeah.
support system. I'm imagining like your therapist, your self-love journey that you've been on,
Mhm.
and your partner, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, that's really been the majority of it, actually,
Mm.
recently. And I haven't, up until, like I said, this past year, even started to allow friends to really support me in ways that I want. And so that's been a new part of the journey, too, is like, oh, you gotta like make space for other people outside of just therapist, partner, and myself, right? Like to be there for you, because that's the other thing that I've been recognizing. Like, I've been a really good person, good friend, good son, all that stuff. But it's like I want I think you mentioned earlier, right? Like where those tentacles, right? Like you're a good employee, you're a good this, you're a good student, you're a good that. And it's like, okay, but we're all flawed and we all have like things going on. And so I don't want to just be known. And that's the piece where
Mm.
all areas of my life have been shifting in these past 6 months in particular, where I'm like, I don't want to be known as the fixer, or Michael's going to come and save the day all the time, or he's going to know the answer all the time. So honestly, I've actually even been more quiet in like in
Mm.
meetings or in like specific environments where I would typically take up a lot of space and immediately take on leadership roles and immediately be like, oh, I got the answer, I got the solution. And it's like, you know what? Sometimes I'm just going to shut up. And sometimes I'm not going to speak up as much because it's not,
Yeah.
all of it is not for me to take on. And also, it takes away the opportunity from someone else that's just trying to, you know, up level or be a leader within their own right. And so that's something that has also been really interesting for me, because it's like, oh, I don't have to be the one to fix all the things or the people, because it's like, you know what? Like, that's a lot.
Yeah. Michael, that's such a like a powerful realization, I think.
It's been
Because
wild.
yeah, it's like for one, because you're releasing control. I
Yeah.
always tell my people, like, I feel like we have this false sense of control, right? So we think
Yes.
if we show up one way, we're gonna get like this is the way, and so you're releasing control and being willing to enter a relationship and seeing how they interpret you even when you're not that person. That's so hard for us, right? Because
Yes.
it's like, what are they gonna think? Or like, but only then, like, because I think if we enter every relationship so hard where it's like, I got you, I'm here for you, I'm this, then yeah, we automatically, they're like, oh, that's what that person is about.
Yeah. And we're
Yeah.
human beings, right? Like we get used to it. Like we get used to people always being there in certain ways. And so when that shifts, uh, I mean, I think we all go there like, oh, what's that about?
Yeah.
But I think that has taught me to be like, let's zoom out, Michael, and realize like, what type of support do you need? Like me, like what do you need in this experience? And then also thinking about the other person that's part of the equation, right? Because there's two people in any given relationship, and so that's in very just so thought provoking. And I know you resonate with this because you're empathic as well. But it's like you do,
Mm,
at least for me, I notice when people notice the shift in me, and
yeah.
it's really hard for me not to like be like, hey, I can tell that you noticed something because that's not for me to do all the time. And so that's been another thing where I've
Yeah.
noticed people notice the shift. And I'm like, you know what? I don't have to do anything about that.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Ooh. Okay, two
Yeah.
things. So
So I'm like, who am I?
when I started to do that with my family, it was so interesting because I was like, yeah, I do have moods, you guys. Guess what? I'm not always in a good mood. Or like I started to be more emotional, like more like I would
Yes.
I would I started cuz I think I don't know if you resonate, but like
Hmm.
I think something else that we do is that like in the, let's say, relationship with friends, we don't reach out until we feel good. And then we're like, "Oh, let's hang out," right?
Oh,
But if we're
totally.
not feeling good, in our shell. And so obviously, how are people going to support us and be there for us? But it's like part of us feel like shame around that
Oh,
shadowy
yeah.
self. So but in showing up fully, and this is what I mean, and I'm so thankful for this conversation, Michael, because I'm putting words
Same.
to some of the
Same.
things. But like I started, authenticity for me means so much more like than my style or like something like that.
Yes.
It's more about like, can I show up authentically in my own family circle? And so during the 2 years that I was in Tennessee, like it was very concentrated family time. We were going through a tough time, and I started to say no to things. So like maybe Priscilla from a couple years ago would be like, oh well, my mom flew out all the way over here, so like why wouldn't I go out with them, like if they're
Mhm.
in a good mood, blah blah blah. Like I started saying no, and they started going out without me, and I started, like, it felt like something was like something terrible is gonna happen inside
Yes.
me, right? Like I was like, they're gonna scream at me, or they're gonna be mad, or that's gonna be awkward. But I realized too that part of who made it awkward was me. Like I was the one who held all
Yeah.
the shame
Yeah.
and the guilt. And so they started to get used to me saying no if I wasn't, like, if I didn't have energy. They started to get used to me crying mid conversation because like I was getting emotional, and
Mm.
like my mom was even like, I never knew how sensitive you were. I'm like, me either. But I'm allowing myself to be myself, and
Uh,
I allowed myself to get upset and like walk away when I was always the one like, I'm gonna hold space until the end until we fix it. And
until
I
we
was
fix
like,
it.
yeah. And so
Yep.
now it's like that is what it meant to me, like show up fully. And it's scary. It's scary to be like, well, am I not a good daughter anymore? What are they gonna say to others? But I lost that fear. And so yeah, it's so cool that you're
Yeah.
also like
Oof.
losing it too.
Yeah, for sure. And it's taken a long time. Where I'm at in my journey is, and I've been working with my therapist for 4 years, actually 4 years in April.
Mm.
And I just started telling her stuff about things that happened in my childhood. And so it's
Mm.
taken me a long time because so much of it was rooted in me protecting the image of my family. And
Mm.
here's the thing, like, I understand that my family didn't have the resources and the awareness of like generational trauma and like all these things, right? Especially if they were traumatized and abused from when they were children.
Yeah.
However, something that I'm now realizing many years down the line in therapy is like, but that doesn't excuse certain things that happened. And
Mm.
it doesn't take away from the impact that it had on me. And
Yeah.
so for so long, I didn't want the image, right? Going back to interpretation and all this stuff, like I didn't want the image to be seen in any sort of negative light. So I wouldn't allow myself to even like think about those moments. And now it's like, if we're really talking about the whole self, right? And that's something my therapist has been like, this is part of you. Like, this is something you've been carrying for a long time. You have to allow yourself to feel into these things and actually process through them. Um, and that's been the piece where of the journey where I'm at now, where it's like, okay, Michael, like, if we really, really are talking about healing, like we have to go there. And it's scary. It is so scary.
Mm.
But at the same time, I feel like going back to the pruning thing that I just talked about, like it has to happen for me to reach my true potential. And my true potential before used to be so tied to like career and accolades and all that stuff. But I'm like, my true potential is like me getting in touch with my highest self and like being as connected to my highest self as
Mm.
possible. In order to do that, there's all these life lessons and the cycles that I need to go through and to heal through and to process through to get more in tune with my own intuition. And I do feel like since having really hardline boundaries with family and distancing myself, honestly, these past now almost 7 or 8 months, it's been sad and I grieve even more. And I have these fleeting moments of sadness, especially when I'm driving in the car. I just have like had these moments.
Mm.
But at the same
Yeah.
time, so many things have been opening up. And the opportunities that have just been coming my way so quickly these past few months alone, I'm like, I would not have had the space, like the spiritual, energetic space to allow for those things to even come into my energetic sphere if I was still so deeply entrenched into what that people pleasing identity was. And so it is so fascinating to me because I'm like, I can feel it like just energetically, spiritually, or I'm like, that cycle has closed. And then this cycle is starting, but that cycle does include all of these emotions. So it's not always happy. And I can have all these amazing things happen, and I can still, in that same day, feel like, oh, damn, I don't really have a connection to my family. And that's really sad. So it's
Mm.
that piece.
Yeah, you're like juggling everything as it's
Yeah.
coming.
Yes. Yes. For sure.
I think one thing worth noting too is like the good news is that it's ever evolving, right? So like in this moment, you need that much space, especially like
Yes.
in this moment, someone who is so empathetic and maybe highly sensitive and like aware and all of the things, right? Like it requires literal distance,
Yeah.
but I will say, like, as you kind of take your power back and strengthen and like build a different kinds of muscles, then maybe as much space isn't needed, or maybe in a different way it's needed. But like what that's the
Yeah.
cool part is that
Yes.
sometimes we think it's like a forever change, and that's what scares us. Like, oh, like I'm losing them forever, or I'll never be able to have a conversation with them. And for some people, that's true, and like we respect
Yes.
that, right? There's some certain relationships that has to happen, but for others, like just remembering, they evolve in that space too. Like when you
Yeah.
remove
Yes.
yourself,
Yes.
they do, you do, and so there could be different ways of reconnecting that there wasn't in the past.
Totally. And I fully believe that. And it's something that took time because like even a few months into not really speaking, I was like, oh, I should already like I should start a conversation or I should
Mm,
initiate something. And then I realized I was like, which was hard because I felt guilty the moment that I actually admitted it to myself. I was like, I don't want to right now. I'm like,
mm,
I need space. Like I need space, the space that I've never had before. Um, and I had to like really sit there and be like, what does this really mean? And
yeah.
to me, I think you put it in a great way. It's like it's taking back my power. It doesn't mean that I'm like being a selfish person or not a good family member or not a good son or whatever you want to say, right? To me, it's like, no, I'm really actually getting to know this version of myself and like what actually feels like I'm coming into wholeness. Even though I don't fully know what that all means just yet for me, but that's okay. But I
Yeah.
feel like I'm coming into wholeness. And in order to do that, like I do have to make some really serious decisions. And part of that is like when I need something, I need to honor the need and not immediately go to like, well, but this person's need says this. And so I can't. It's like,
Mm.
flipping the switch. So that's very powerful.
Yeah. And I commend you for this moment in time, because I think like there's a million things that can come to your mind. Like I remember when I took space from my dad, it was like, what if he passes away? What if
Oh,
something
yeah.
happens,
Oh, yeah.
And it's
Yes.
like heavy shit
Yeah.
that you're like grappling. So even though sometimes like they think it's easy for you, like it's not,
No.
it's just as hard on this end. But I'm glad, that you're doing this for you, because sometimes that's what's needed. And maybe even just to like start wrapping up the conversation, like talking about how important it is to validate your experience of reality, because probably your parents or whoever is in your family could never understand the depth of what this all means to you and how much it's impacted you, you
Yes.
know?
Yes.
And they don't
Yes.
see it because they're not you. Like, they don't, for one, they've seen you as this strong, you got this person constantly. So they're like what do you mean you're her and you need space and you like whatever, right? Like, so similarly, like I think my parents or my even my sister, like she doesn't experience reality like I do. Maybe some of them don't have the depth in certain aspects, some
Yeah.
of them don't care or aren't willing. I don't know, like I feel like sometimes empaths, we're like, nuestro corazón está así open, and just because we haven't shown that, it doesn't mean we don't walk around with our heart open like that our whole lives, and so it's like, yeah, there's a lot of healing that has to happen
Yes.
that is invisible.
Yeah, and I think you put out a post recently, and I was like, oh yeah, that like really resonates because it was about softness. I remember now. This a few years back,
Yes.
and I was like, oh, that's so like it was so good. Um, and I was like, yeah, when you're the strong one, and you're always the person that has your stuff together, and you're gonna know what to do in case of an emergency or a problem pops up. Um, that's how people see you. Like it just gets so like connected to who you are to those people, right? And it's like, what if I didn't want to be that anymore? Like that's the piece that I'm now faced with. It's like I can still be a leader, I can still be strong and all that stuff, but what if I don't want to be known for that all the time?
Yeah.
And how do I then approach more of this like softness, right? Because the softness is there, it just hasn't really been allowed to come out very much. Um, and I think that's what makes a really strong empathic leader. Because I think sometimes when
Mm,
people think leader, right, they think very like I don't know, a socialized belief of like really like strong headed and like sometimes stubborn at times, or like, no, this is like my way or the highway. And it's like, you don't have to be that type of leader. I think there's many different types of leader. And I think an emotional or empathic, in my opinion, I think it's a better type of leader because you're intuitive and you know the energy of the room and you can make decisions and you can still have a strong decision, but you can also base it off of like what's the energy. And so
mm,
I've been thinking about that too in terms of my own leadership style, because I have been in a lot of leadership positions. I know you have too throughout my life, and I've been saying no to a lot of things as well, where I'm just like, I don't have to take on that role at the moment, or
yeah.
like this is the type of leader that I want to now be, and what does that look like to allow for more emotion to come through. um so that's cool, but yeah, it's this getting to know myself period. And when you said that reconnection can happen, I think that's why when I think of cycles, I think of them as circles and I think of them as cyclical.
Mm,
Because a cycle can end, right, in a circle, but within that circle can be an opening to another cycle that's still impacted by the previous cycle, but you're just in a new space. And
yeah.
to me, I'm like, okay, that makes sense in my head because I think about it through like spiritual energy. And I'm like, you don't just
Mm-hmm.
let go of one thing and you're like, I'll never think about that again. So
Yeah, and life and it, like, creates opportunities for just different things, like, yeah, I mean, that I think that's a whole other conversation, but like sometimes I think sometimes like you can stand really strong in one perspective of life, and then life shows you a whole other scenario where it's like, that gives me another perspective of life, and yeah. But yeah, I think just one thing I wanted to also just know is, in the validating your experience, I think sometimes family doesn't realize also that like you don't only hold that role in your family, you hold it with your friends and at work. And so they can't, I don't think they
Mhm.
can actually picture what that feels like, to have to show up fully in all those spaces that you occupy and think that you can only occupy them as good, as smart,
Yes.
as knowing, you know. That's
Yes.
exhausting, and
Yes.
it's an
Yes.
exhaustion that some people can't comprehend because they don't feel that responsibility. Some people can show up to work and half-ass and be fine, and they're like whatever, you know. And so like
Mhm.
that's their reality, and so maybe we can't comprehend that reality, but they can't comprehend ours, you know.
Yes. And not to open up a can of words, but I do feel like I need to say this because I like there in to me for any type of relationship to be successful, both parties need to be heard, right, and validated
Mm-hmm.
to an extent. Doesn't mean they always agree with each other, but I do feel like there needs to be some sort of understanding and awareness. And if you really want a relationship to work, whether it's a friendship, romance, family, there does need to be some adjustment sometimes when someone says like, hey, this bothers me, or I cannot support that, or I can't be around that anymore. um, and I do feel like when it comes to a lot of first gen folks that I've met, children of immigrants, like um, it, it's hard to do that, or to even allow yourself to be like, I can hold them accountable too. There's a lot
Mm.
of like this, the child, even as an adult, I experience it, where it's like the child needs to do this, right? Or respect this. But it's like, we're now, in my case, I'm like, we're now adults. All of us are adults here. And so I get to hold you all accountable too. And I get
Mm.
to speak my feelings too. And if something's not respected, I also get the ability, or I have the ability to also be like, that's not what I want. And so therefore I need to do this, right? And that may be distance for some time. It may be like, I will not go to those occasions or to those family get-togethers because, such and such is going to be there, or that happens.
Mm-hmm.
But I do want to just emphasize that, because a lot of people never give themselves, or just don't have the ability, just because they haven't had the awareness, or they haven't gone through certain experiences, or it's just really frankly scary. But to go there, and I feel
Yeah.
like more people need to be given the space and the opportunity to go there, because ultimately what I really think it is that you're actually putting yourself as a priority. Um, and a lot of people never get the opportunity. The amount of people that I talk to, they're like in their 40s and 50s, that to this day, they're like, I know that I feel like crap being in those spaces, but I cannot and will not say anything because my mom needs me to be there, or my like blah 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 like says that I will be this if I don't. And it's like, I can't do that
Yeah.
anymore. Like for me, I can't. I respect people that are where they at in their journey. But for me, I'm like, I just can't. It breaks down my soul. It's just like, that's how deep I feel it now. And it doesn't mean that like I don't go to like everything that I'm like, oh, I don't want to be there. There's some things that I'm gonna have to be at, right? Like where I don't necessarily have all the decision making power.
Mm.
But it does mean that in most cases, I will get that opportunity to be like, you know what, that's not good for me, and I'm not gonna do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I just say, like, some of those people that are holding that make you feel guilty also feel that way. They can't find it within themselves to say no. And so then they
Yeah.
uphold, again, back to the beginning, the matrix of the family, and the we're supposed to's, and like you have to's, and you know, this is what makes you goods. Like, yeah. So
Oof. Yes.
so important. I think like just at the root of it all, a relationship, building a relationship with yourself is so important. So I want to just plug that because that's what's going to hold you exactly. Like it's so hard for us to even say no, and then when we get pushback when we do, or when we speak our truth,
Hmm.
because parents sometimes hold that idea of like, I tried my best so you can't complain, right? I did the best that I could. So
Yes.
that
That part.
conversation ends there.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
like it's like actually and similarly, like likely because if they have that view, they don't respect your time, they don't respect your opinion, right? They like, so they can overstep in all of these areas of your life, and they won't stop overstepping until you respect your time, you respect your opinion, you respect your voice, all of these things, you know. And so when you start
Preach.
showing them that, either one or a couple of things could happen, but like for one,
Yes.
like it won't happen if you don't. They're not going to one day stop and be like, oh, let me not, you know, overstep in your, or let me consider your opinion as better than mine, you know. Like
Yes.
if they're used to not, but oh, it's me hija, whatever, you
Hmm.
know.
Hmm.
Yeah, so understanding that, like, you have to understand, hey, like, give yourself credit, pues, as a first gen. You are that person that helped them
Yeah,
connect cable. You
yes,
are the translator. You are the one that got the degree. Maybe they did too. I'm not saying you're
yes,
better than them. I'm just saying give yourself credit and like stand behind that, as opposed to only giving them credit and standing behind what they've done.
yes. And you may be the first gen to break down all these freaking cycles of abuse and trauma and all that stuff. I think so much of it is tied to like what we accomplish in life, whether it's education or career, but whether or not our family or those around us, just period, understand or agree with our healing journey, I think that's a whole different thing. But you're still modeling it. And for some,
Mm,
including like our parents, our grandparents, they may not have ever had a model, us,
mm,
anyone around them to even exhibit what it could look like to live a healthy life where you don't
yeah.
put up with all this like BS that is not meant for you. And so that just clicked in my mind. I'm like, you could be first gen like cycle breaker or like first gen this, and that. And so, anyways, I love what you do. And I just need to also just say that
Thank you.
because I think you're opening up so many opportunities for people. Because every single time that I've met with you and done these types of things, like I learn things about myself too. And it's just like, whoa, the
Mm,
more that we have people like ourselves engaging in these conversations, I think the better for us individually, but also it changes the narrative around what it means to even be first gen. Because I think first gen has
yeah.
always, at least since I've grown up and used the word or the term, a lot of it is tied to like education, which I'm extremely proud of, like my degrees. But it's like there's other things involved. So
Yeah.
thank you for what you do because it's amazing.
Ah, thank you too. No, thank you, Michael. I love our conversations. I knew it was going to be
Same.
juicy. I was like, Michael, I kept knocking on his door, like, hey, I'm ready when you are, because I know these
Thank you
combos
for the
are
nudges.
fire. Yeah. So if you want to just tell people where they can find you, I'll make sure to like link your stuff. But if you
Yes.
want to tell them that, what you have going on.
Honestly, these days, I'm pretty much all over social media. So you can find me at Arise with Lemus. That's my handle across all my social channels and pretty active among most of them. And right now, where I'm at, and I just feel like this is kind of embarking on a new era, is
Okay.
a lot of just creative pursuits. So if y'all want
Mm,
to collab and do things like this, that's just where I'm finding myself. I'm finding myself really wanting to dig deeper into just like creativity, whether it's collaborations on podcasts or just doing different types of activities. That's where I'm at right now. So if
mm-hmm.
anyone wants to collab or get to know me more, feel free to connect via social media. I also have a website, and that's reclaimingyourhappinesswithlemus.com. And you can find me there.
Yee, so exciting. And I'm so excited to see also how this shifts, like what you create, from like your business and stuff.
Yes.
Ah,
Yes. Thank you.
so cool. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this conversation. Make sure that you share it with your amigas, amigos, amigues, primas, primos, primas, anyone that would find this conversation helpful. I definitely think that even hearing people who are a couple steps ahead or in the same level or like going through the same thing, it helps reinforce what you're trying to do in your life, because you may not be getting positive feedback with those around you. And so it's so good to hear that other people are going through it and standing behind what they're doing, even if it feels hard, even if it doesn't feel natural. You got this. We believe in you. And yeah, thank you so much, Michael. We hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.